ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hey, Jez and Jules here. Hey, Jules, do you ever lie down and look at the ceiling and wonder, what is the meaning of life?
Every day of my life, Jez.
Same. And that's why I wanted to talk about it on the pod this week.
And we've got some pretty good answers, actually. You can find Not Stupid on the ABC Listen app.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy.
Donald Trump says America's been looted and plundered for decades. His response, big tariffs or taxes charged on goods imported to the United States, including 10% on everything sent from Australia. They're coming into effect this weekend, and Trump thinks they'll revitalise the American economy. The Australian Treasurer describes it as a dark day for the global economy.
And as the Australian economy is turning a corner, today we see the global economy take a turn for the worse.
Today, North America correspondent Carrington Clarke explains what it means for all of us. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Day. Carrington, apparently America is liberated, according to Donald Trump, of course.
Yeah, this is quite the branding exercise from the American president. He promised today would be an earth-shaking announcement, and I think he's fulfilled that. He's claiming that this is about taking the battle up to countries that he says have cheated America for decades. But really it is about overhauling the global trading system. And what he is promising to do is to effectively isolate America, bringing production back to the United States. But he's going to do that by forcing up the prices that Americans pay for goods that are imported.
His language was pretty dramatic, wasn't it? He was a salesman, really, wasn't he, in the Rose Garden?
He was in full flight. The language was so loaded.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream.
So he says America, Carrington, is being ripped off. So he's telling the Americans, I'm going to fix this big problem. What are people saying? Has America in some way been ripped off over time or not?
So I would say the consensus among economists is that overall trade is good. Donald Trump has a view that trade is effectively a zero-sum game. If you're selling more than you're buying from a country, then you're winning. And if you're buying more than you're selling, then you're a sucker, you're losing. Now, that is not what most orthodox economists believe. They believe you can both win. If you're buying things from another country because they can produce it cheaper or the products they're producing are better quality, then you're actually a winner as well because you're able to access those products. Donald Trump doesn't see it that way. He thinks Americans should be buying things that are made at home.
Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers.
In Donald Trump's worldview, it appears that all countries besides America are bad actors.
All right, well, let's look then at who's being hit the hardest. We better start with us. Donald Trump, he says he likes Australians, but Carrington, not enough to leave us alone, right?
Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it because they don't want it to affect their farmers. And you know what? I don't blame them, but we're doing the same thing right now, starting about midnight tonight, I would say.
Beef was singled out in his comment. So what will he be doing in that space?
Yeah, it was fascinating to see Australia singled out at this announcement. And effectively what they're saying is that this is an example of a non-tariff trade barrier, using the excuse, as they see it, of biosecurity in order to keep American products out. The argument with beef, the restriction was put in place because of an outbreak of mad cow disease in North America back at the start of the 2000s. Now, Americans would say that that risk is very low. It shouldn't be used as a restriction on that trade. But their logic goes further, and they say even in cases where America has a trade surplus, their trade surplus should be even bigger if it weren't for these artificial trade restrictions. So it's hard to argue against this because at some point the logic just seems to kind of wind itself into oblivion.
There's going to be a 10% tariff on everything else we export as well. So, I mean, what else do we send to the United States?
There is a huge amount of agricultural products that travel between the two countries as well as other commodities. And this will hurt. The question, though, and this is when it starts to get kind of technical and difficult to kind of assess, which is why I think people are at the moment really trying to work through different scenarios, is on one hand, Australia is being hurt by this 10% tariff, but because we're not being hit by as big a tariff as other countries are, perhaps that's actually a competitive advantage against other countries. So in some circumstances, perhaps Australia will export more to America because we will displace some of the product coming from other countries that get hit by a bigger tariff. Now, this is a complicated kind of spaghetti map of trade that's going to be distorted by these actions. And that's why economists are so concerned, because we don't actually yet know what these consequences truly will be.
Yeah, really interesting. All right, so we'll have to see how it plays out, really. But the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he says that this is not an act of a friend. And also he says it just lacks logic.
And you can see how the Prime Minister has come to that conclusion. The line of logic gets pretty squiggly pretty quickly.
Yeah.
When they talk about slapping these reciprocal tariffs and the way that they've worked out this calculation, it doesn't fit any model I've ever seen in economics about how to assess what tariffs a country is facing in the opposite direction. Instead, it seems to be mostly just based very simply on the trade surplus, how much America sends to them versus how much the country sends to America. So you can understand the frustration of the Australian Prime Minister, which is that even by the logic, if you can call it that, of this tariff policy, Australia shouldn't be being hit with a 10% punishment.
We'll continue to put our case for what we regard is a reciprocal arrangement, which is for our products to be tariff-free, just as products into Australia from the United States are tariff-free. And importantly, the United States does enjoy a 2-for-1 historical trade surplus with Australia.
Well, the Prime Minister says, of course, that we won't be imposing reciprocal tariffs. And the Nationals leader, David Littleproud, he says we really need a relationship reset.
We've got a Prime Minister that unfortunately can't even get a phone call with the President, and I sense that's probably because of the personal disparaging comments he's made about President Trump in the past. So we need to have a reset.
So, Carrington, in a moment we'll get to what this 10% tariff actually means for us and our economy. But before we do, as we mentioned, we're by no means the worst hit. who is the worst hit and what sort of, tariffs will they be facing?
I mean, a huge amount of attention was on the 34% tariff that China will be hit with, because that's in addition to the 20% tariff that they've already been hit with by the Trump administration. So that's a whopping 54%, given they are the second biggest economy in the world and such an important trading partner from the United States. That is such a whack. But other important economies are also being hit, including India at 26%, Japan's being hit with 24%, and Taiwan 32%. But then some of the world's poorest nations, relatively small countries in terms of their trade with the United States, like South Sudan, Burundi, Central African Republic, are also being hit hard. Cambodia being hit with a 49% tariff. And again, it just seems to be based on this very simplistic calculation of the kind of how much they send to America versus how much America sends to them.
All right, well, let's just turn to that question of what effect this could have on our economy and, of course, our exporters. How worried do you think we should be, or is that just not clear at the moment?
I think the greatest concern for Australia is not the direct impact on the relationship between the United States and Australia in terms of trade. Although that is important, they are an important trading partner. The biggest risk here is what does this do to the global economy? The jitters that has created are because that could effectively see a massive downturn in global growth. And then we start to talk about the R word, potential recession. The announcement had all the hallmarks of a man who genuinely believed this could be a big part of his legacy. And that's why people are now so concerned, because if he goes through with this plan, most economists believe it will be devastating for global growth, and that is going to hurt Australia as a medium-sized economy that is heavily involved and heavily dependent in international trade. That's going to potentially put the entire economy at risk because of those indirect consequences of what this does to other countries that we also trade with.
And really, for the American people, they might be being told one thing, but the reality of this could be very different, right? Even Anthony Albanese points out he learnt this lesson at school, that when you put tariffs on, things become more expensive. So in fact, Americans are going to be paying a lot more for most things, including for the Australian beef in their Big Macs, apparently.
That's exactly right. Most of the beef that Australia exports to the United States is turned into hamburgers. These tariffs will be paid by American people. When they import things, it's either the businesses who are importing things that they need to use in their own business, they pay it, or the end consumer will pay it. And Americans will feel this acutely and potentially very, very quickly. And this is potentially going to be a rocket under inflation. And if inflation starts to spiral out of control, well, then Donald Trump has a major political problem on his hands. He went to the election promising to get prices down. He seems to have moved away from that promise now. But if this actually pushes up prices in a noticeable way, then I think the Republicans could be in a lot of trouble at the midterm elections next year.
All right, and just tell me, Carrington, do you think there is still room for Australia to negotiate our way out of these tariffs? So
the message from the White House has been that Donald Trump is always willing to make a deal. The question is he really willing to now back away from what has been a full-throated endorsement of tariffs? The optics of that surely aren't good. If he now starts exempting individual countries, it becomes even more complicated. Now, that's not to say Australia won't be able to get an exemption. They may well be able to convince him if they have the right people speaking in his ear. But at this point, my assessment is that Donald Trump genuinely believes in tariffs. And so it is an uphill battle, I think, for individual countries to convince him to give them the exemption, but that's not an impossibility. And I think things will start to change if he really starts to feel the political pinch and if it looks like he is losing the American public.
Carrington Clarke is the ABC's North America correspondent. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.